In Fairfax County, Virginia, a major legal and political clash is unfolding, one that could have ripple effects far beyond the county lines. This conflict is not just about local policy, it's about the very principles that underpin the American justice system, and who gets to decide how those principles are applied. At the center of this storm are two powerful forces, the Law Enforcement Legal Defense Fund, or LELDF, and Commonwealth's attorney, Steve Descano, the county's top prosecutor. Their dispute has drawn attention from legal experts, activists, and politicians across the country. The LELDF has taken the extraordinary step of formally requesting that the U.S. Department of Justice launch an investigation into Descano's office. They allege that his prosecutorial policies are not only controversial, but that they actively undermine the principle of equal justice under the law. At the heart of the dispute is a contentious accusation. The LELDF claims that Descano's office gives special consideration to non-citizen criminal suspects, particularly those who are undocumented immigrants. They argue that these defendants are sometimes offered plea deals or reduced charges to help them avoid deportation. Meanwhile, American citizens facing similar charges, the LELDF contends, are held to stricter standards and receive less leniency. This, they say, creates a justice system where outcomes depend not on the facts of the case, but on a person's immigration status. In their letter to the DOJ, the LELDF describes what they see as a two-tiered system of justice. For non-citizens, the risk of deportation becomes a central factor in prosecution decisions, a risk that American citizens never have to face. This, they argue, is fundamentally unfair and erodes public trust in the legal system. This controversy signals a significant shift in the national conversation about criminal justice. For years, the focus has been on police departments and their conduct. Now, attention is turning to the immense power held by elected prosecutors, and how their choices can shape entire communities. The central question emerges: can the discretion of prosecutors, intended to ensure fairness, actually become a source of systemic discrimination? And if so, who should hold them accountable? If the Department of Justice, under the Trump administration, decides to investigate, it could set a powerful precedent for federal oversight of local prosecutors. Such a move would be unprecedented, raising questions about the balance of power between local and federal authorities. On the other hand, if the DOJ declines to act, critics warn it will send a message that glaring disparities in the justice system can be ignored, deepening public skepticism and frustration. As this battle plays out, Fairfax County stands as a test case for the future of criminal justice reform in America, a place where the nation's debates over fairness, accountability, and the rule of law are coming to a head. The LELDF is invoking the federal pattern or practice statute, which allows the DOJ to investigate agencies suspected of systemic rights violations. Traditionally used to probe police departments after high-profile misconduct, this law is now being aimed at a prosecutor's office. The LELDF argues that if police can be investigated for bias, so can prosecutors who allegedly favor non-citizens over citizens. The claim: Descano's office systematically offers leniency to non-citizens to help them avoid deportation, disadvantaging citizens. This is a novel use of the law, and its success depends on whether the DOJ sees such policies as civil rights violations. Descano's supporters call it humane discretion. Critics call it unconstitutional favoritism. The DOJ's response will test the boundaries of prosecutorial power. Steve Descano, elected in 2019 as the Commonwealth's attorney for Fairfax County, Virginia, has quickly become one of the most talked-about prosecutors in the country. His election marked a significant shift in the region's approach to criminal justice, as he ran on a platform promising sweeping reforms and a new vision for the prosecutor's office. Descano represents a growing wave of progressive prosecutors across the United States who are challenging traditional approaches to law enforcement and advocating for criminal justice reform. These leaders argue that the justice system should focus more on fairness, equity, and rehabilitation, rather than simply punishment. Before entering public office, Descano served as a federal prosecutor and is a graduate of the prestigious United States Military Academy at West Point. His background in both the military and federal law enforcement has shaped his disciplined yet reform-minded approach to prosecution. As Commonwealth's attorney, he pledged to end the use of cash bail, reduce prosecutions for low-level, non-violent offenses, and prioritize rehabilitation and restorative justice programs over incarceration. Descano believes these changes can help break cycles of poverty and crime. His policies, such as considering the immigration consequences of criminal charges, have made him a hero to some reform advocates and a target for critics who argue he is too lenient. The community remains divided with passionate supporters and vocal opponents. Descano's office has implemented programs to divert non-violent offenders away from jail and into treatment or community service, aiming to address root causes of crime and reduce recidivism. He also works to ensure that minor convictions do not automatically lead to deportation for immigrants, reflecting his commitment to keeping families together and promoting fairness in the justice system. Supporters praise these efforts as compassionate justice that recognizes the humanity of every individual and seeks to build safer, stronger communities. However, critics argue that Descano's approach undermines the equal enforcement of the law and could put public safety at risk, sparking heated debates in both the legal and political arenas. The controversy centers on whether his reforms represent a legitimate and necessary use of prosecutorial discretion, or if they cross the line into neglecting his duty to uphold the law impartially. This ongoing debate raises fundamental questions about the role of prosecutors in shaping justice and the balance between reform and accountability. Now, with a federal investigation request at the center of the controversy, the future of Steve Descano's reforms and his legacy hangs in the balance. Descano's 2020 memo instructs prosecutors to consider immigration consequences when charging non-citizens. The goal: avoid triggering deportation for minor offenses, aiming for proportional punishment. Supporters argue this prevents families from being torn apart over small crimes. Critics, including the LELDF, say it creates a two-tiered system, giving non-citizens special deals unavailable to citizens. They argue that citizens can't negotiate charges to avoid losing a license or other life impacts. So why should non-citizens avoid deportation? The legal question: is this compassionate discretion or unconstitutional discrimination? The LELDF wants the DOJ to declare such policies unlawful and restore equal justice. The Law Enforcement Legal Defense Fund, or LELDF, has brought national attention to the case of Marvin Morales-Ortiz, an undocumented immigrant who was initially charged with murder in a high-profile incident that shocked the local community. The case quickly became a lightning rod for debate, drawing in activists, politicians, and concerned citizens from across the region. After Steve Descano took office as Commonwealth's attorney, the murder charge against Morales-Ortiz was dropped, citing insufficient evidence to proceed to trial. Morales-Ortiz was subsequently released from custody, a decision that immediately sparked controversy and ignited heated discussions about the direction of criminal justice reform in the area. Not long after his release, Morales-Ortiz was arrested again, this time for another violent crime. This development intensified criticism from those who argue that Descano's approach to prosecution, particularly his perceived leniency, puts the safety of the public at risk and undermines trust in the justice system. Critics claim that such outcomes are a direct result of policies that, in their view, prioritize the rights of non-citizens over the safety of the broader community. They argue that these decisions send the wrong message and could embolden further criminal activity. However, Descano's office firmly maintains that the decision to drop the charge was based solely on the available evidence, not on Morales-Ortiz's immigration status. They emphasize that the justice system must operate on facts and proof, not public pressure or political considerations. Supporters of Descano argue that it is fundamentally unjust to prosecute anyone, regardless of their background, without sufficient evidence. They believe that upholding due process and the presumption of innocence is essential to a fair and equitable legal system. The Morales-Ortiz case has become a focal point in a larger debate. Is this a failure of prosecutorial judgment or a principled stand for justice and constitutional rights? The answer depends on one's perspective, and the stakes feel higher than ever. For critics, the case is proof that current policies are dangerously misguided. For supporters, it's a demonstration of due process and the importance of not rushing to judgment, even in the most difficult cases. Ultimately, the Morales-Ortiz case has become a powerful symbol for both sides of the debate, encapsulating the tensions and questions at the heart of modern criminal justice reform. The LDF's complaint accuses Descano's office of running a discriminatory system that endangers public safety. They argue that considering immigration status creates two classes of defendants, citizens and non-citizens. Non-citizens, they claim, get special deals to avoid deportation, an option citizens don't have for their own life-altering consequences. The LELDF says this violates equal protection and puts the community at risk, citing the Morales-Ortiz case as evidence. They argue a prosecutor's duty is to protect the public, not to prioritize social goals like preventing deportation. The complaint frames Descano's policy as a systemic, office-wide practice, not isolated incidents. The LELDF wants federal intervention to restore fairness and the rule of law. The heart of their argument: justice must be blind to citizenship. Supporters of Descano defend his policies as a humane evolution of justice, rooted in prosecutorial discretion. They argue that considering immigration consequences is about proportionality, avoiding life-altering penalties for minor crimes. For non-citizens, deportation can be a harsher punishment than the crime warrants, tearing families apart and harming communities. Descano's backers say this isn't special treatment, but an attempt to equalize outcomes for all defendants. They believe trust between immigrant communities and law enforcement improves public safety. When people aren't afraid of deportation, they're more likely to report crimes and cooperate with police. Supporters see the policy as a smart, strategic way to build safer, more just communities. For them, Descano's approach is about fairness, not favoritism. The debate is also shaped by politics and funding. Critics label Descano a Soros-backed prosecutor due to campaign support from a PAC linked to George Soros. Opponents argue this proves his reforms are part of a national agenda, not local needs. Descano and his supporters call this a distraction, insisting he's fulfilling promises made to Fairfax voters. They argue the real issue is the substance of his policies, not who funded his campaign. The LELDF's complaint focuses on alleged discrimination, not campaign finance. Ultimately, the fight is about law, public safety, and the meaning of equal justice. The Fairfax County controversy raises a fundamental question. What does equal justice mean? Should the law be applied identically to everyone, or should prosecutors use discretion to ensure punishments are truly fair? The LELDF argues for strict, impartial application. No exceptions for anyone. Descano's supporters believe true equality sometimes requires different treatment to avoid disproportionate harm. The DOJ's decision will set a precedent for prosecutorial discretion and federal oversight. The outcome will shape the future of criminal justice reform far beyond Fairfax. The challenge: building a system that is both fair in process and humane in results, for citizens and immigrants alike.